back to the space between the picket lines. Last weekend, we dove straight into the deep end with an honest, in-depth look at what abortions truly do and the aftermath thereof. Today is a sort of part 2, if you will, because now we get to look at how all of the abortion industry came to be what we know it to be today. What is the true and honest history of abortion? To open this week's video with some words that many people have found extremely inspiring in years gone by. Quote, "Do not be misled into thinking that you can fight a disease without killing the carrier, without destroying the bacillus. Don't think that you can fight racial tuberculosis without taking care to rid the nation of the carrier of that tuberculosis. This contamination will not subside. This poisoning of the nation will not end until the carrier has been banished from our midst." Now, if those words sound convincing, that was exactly the point. And with them, and many just like them, Adolf Hitler convinced the German people to send at least 6 million Jews and gypsies and homosexuals and many more to their extermination. Now, how about quote number 2? Quote, "To create a race of thoroughbreds requires the application of a stern and rigid policy of sterilization and segregation to that grade of population whose progeny is already tainted or whose inheritance is such that objectionable traits may be transmitted to offspring, and to give certain dysgenic groups in our population their choice of segregation or sterilization." Now notice the many similarities between statement number 1 and statement number 2. A clear and, to many, convincing sounding argument for the extermination of at least 61 million people. This did not come from Hitler, though, the second quote. That quote came from Margaret Sanger, many of you know her as the matriarch of Planned Parenthood. Now, the story of how these types of words led to a modern-day America, where a battle cry that's often heard is abortion on demand and without apology. That tale is a fascinating, dark, twisted, and pivotal journey. And we are going to go on that journey today. So, taking things way back, enter 1550 BC in Egypt, when BritannicaProcon.org describes the first ever abortion method that we have written proof of. It was the Egyptian medical text Eber's Papyrus, which told Egyptians to vaginally insert plant fiber covered with honey and crushed dates to induce an abortion. Now from there, abortions became accepted in both the ancient Greek and ancient Roman worlds. Aristotle was shockingly on board, saying, quote, "When couples have children in excess, let abortions be procured before sense and life have begun." Then came the latter part of the Roman Empire, when abortion was not looked on as murder, but rather a crime against a husband who was losing out on a potential child. Now, narrowing things down to Western history, we find the logic to be that it was not considered murder so long as it occurred before something that was dubbed quickening, which was their term for the first detectable movement of the child in utero. Next up, 1821 and the state of Connecticut. Now, Connecticut had the distinction of becoming the first state here in the USA to criminalize abortion. Connecticut banned the selling of an abortion-inducing poison to women, what we would probably consider to be an incredibly early form of the abortion pill, which you can actually find out all about in the What Abortions Do video for this channel. But interestingly enough, Connecticut did not punish the women who took the poison. The only punishment was for those who were actually giving them this poison. Now, the punishment for women, that started in New York, of all places, in 1845, at which point the women did in fact hold equal blame in the eyes of the law, no matter if they induced the abortion before or after the quickening. Now this, my friends, this is where Dr. Horatio Robinson Storer came into the picture. He was considered to be an early pro-life advocate, and in the mid-1800s, he single-handedly convinced the American Medical Association to join him in campaigning for the outlawing of abortion nationwide. The result: by the early 1900s, most states had banned abortions, and by 1965, most became all of the states in the United States. Now, with some exceptions, of course, varying by state, as is the way of these things. And that gets us to Margaret Sanger. Now, for our purposes, she makes her debut in 1911, which we know, compliments of liveaction.org, when she moved to New York and became a student of one Thomas Robert Malthus, who was an incredibly vocal eugenicist. Now, brief interjection here to explain that eugenics, according to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, is, quote, the practice or advocacy of controlled selective breeding of human populations, as by sterilization, to improve the population's genetic composition, unquote. So, in layman's terms, it basically means to breed out that which is considered undesirable and to breed in that which is considered desirable. Now, note that definition varies based on the person. Also of note, eugenics means well-born and was coined by none other than Charles Darwin's cousin, Sir Francis Galton. Now, looping back to what we know via liveaction.org, Sanger was super into the whole eugenics concept. She was actually quite active in all sorts of things, but to keep the focus on the topic at hand, we will look at when she opened her first abortion clinic. The year was 1916. The month, October, and the location, shockingly, New York. She held firm to the beliefs that both birth control and eugenics were incredibly important. And because of this, after she opened it, she did not back down when she was shut down a month later. She kept pressing onwards because, in her eyes, eugenics and birth control, they were inseparable. So you needed abortion clinics. Now, thanks to concernedwomen.org, we know that the groups that she was targeting, in her mind's eye, compliments of the training of her mentor, included the materially poor, the racially inferior, and the mentally incompetent, in her eyes. Let me clarify that for you. Now, we also know, thanks to liveaction.org, that her ultimate plan was set into action in 1921, when she founded something called the American Birth Control League. Another very important side note here regarding birth control specifically, she was quoted as saying, birth control is nothing more or less than the facilitation of the process of weeding out the unfit, of preventing the birth of defectives, or of those who will become defectives. That being said, back to the ABCL. Sanger actually merged it with something called the Birth Control Clinic Research Bureau in 1939 to become what we now call Planned Parenthood. It all loops together. It's crazy. But it gets even crazier. See, eugenicists actually financed its creation and pretty much everything else from the ground up. And Planned Parenthood's international work was originally housed in none other than the offices of the Eugenics Society. The two organizations were intertwined for years with the specific purpose of weeding out those whom Sanger considered to be undesirable, such as Black people, Irish people, mentally deficient people, etc. And as an Irish person, come on, really? Now, some interesting little side snippets from the continuation of Sanger's journey. First, She spoke at a Ku Klux Klan rally in 1926 in Silver Lakes, New Jersey. She also initiated the Negro Project, her name, whose whole concept was weeding out the unfit from amongst the black population. She also played a large role in making forced sterilization common in some places in America, which led to over 60,000 Americans being sterilized against their will. Now, amongst those sterilized were the blind, the deaf, epileptics, the mentally retarded, the mentally ill, and people with low IQs. Essentially, she was an incredibly vile woman who left nothing but devastation in her wake. And just so that there is absolutely no confusion about her legacy, she was widely known to hate black people, those with low IQs, the Irish, and the disabled. And her goal in founding Planned Parenthood was the elimination of what she considered to be those people groups' defective traits from the population. She wanted those traits eliminated as a whole. That desire has led to over 61 million deaths. The greatest human rights tragedy ever. But we are not done yet. Oh, no. That would be far too simple. So how did we get from Planned Parenthood in 1939 to abortion on demand and without apology in 2021? Well, that hinges on Roe v. Wade. So, flash forward to 1973. Planned Parenthood is well underway with offering abortions to women in as many U.S. states as was allowed, and as far into the pregnancy as they were enabled to go. Then, unstoppable force meets what is supposed to be an immovable object, but not so much. Because this is where the story of one Norma McCorvey comes into the narrative. See, we know via BritannicaProcon.org that she was a Texas resident who was seeking an abortion. But at that time, very similar to the present day, it was illegal here, except in the case of saving the mother's life. And she got so mad at this because Planned Parenthood and their subsidiaries could not help her end the life of her preborn child that she actually sued the state of Texas over it. Enter March 3rd of 1970. Like I said, she decided to take her requests to the high courts under the pseudonym of Jane Roe. Now, she originally claimed rape, which is an atrocious crime, but she actually later recanted, stating that she was just hoping to better her odds. Side note here, that's horrible. Point blank. Now, here's where things get really interesting. She actually personally never got the abortion. She ended up having a baby girl, whom she gave up for adoption, which is honorable if you can't take care of the child yourself. She became a Christian and avidly pro-life in 1995, which is my birth year, so that's super cool, and stayed as such until her death. But unfortunately, her case had already set a precedent. Now, we know compliments of libertyuniversity.edu that the reason Roe versus Wade matters so much is because of the wording within the final ruling. Now, the ultimate decision, written by one Justice Harry Blackmun, stated, quote, "A state criminal abortion statute of the current Texas type that accepts from criminality only a life-saving procedure on behalf of the mother and without regard to pregnancy stage and without recognition of the other interests involved is violative of the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment." We'll get back into why that's crazy in just a second. So this judge went on to elaborate that during the first 6 months of pregnancy, a woman could have an abortion for any reason that she saw fit, including but not limited to both gender selection, which you recognize from China, and convenience. As in, is it convenient to her to have this child? Now, very important to note here, do not miss this. The entire concept behind the 14th Amendment is that you cannot unpeople people. And the reason why it was created was to help protect Black people from slavery. I am not making this up. The links are down below. And now the amendment that was tailored to create, to protect life would be misused as an excuse to enable the slaughter of tens of millions more, Black people included. As a direct result of Roe versus Wade, 46 states ended up having to essentially get rid of any abortion laws which they had on the books, or to amend them so that they offered virtually no protections for the preborn. Now, after Roe v. Wade, there were a whole host of similar cases coming to the Supreme Court, such as Casey v. Planned Parenthood in 1992, Gonzalez v. Carhart in 2007, and Whole Women's Health v. Hellerstedt in 2016. Now, taken as a whole, they placed abortion outside of the authorities that govern every other medical procedure. Breaking that down, that means in many states where you could not give a minor an aspirin without parental consent, an abuser could now load up their victim, haul them to an abortion clinic to have the child murdered, essentially removing the only steadfast evidence of their crime, and nobody was allowed to inform the parent. Where medical facilities require very high levels of attention to things like cleanliness and infection prevention and admitting rights to hospitals if something goes wrong and the woman needs help, or whoever it is needs help. Abortion clinics, and abortion clinics alone, were exempt from or just straight up ignored those rules. Such laws made it obvious that abortion was not a medical procedure. It was something different and dark and wrong. And now we get to the final piece of the puzzle. First wave feminism versus the corruption of every incarnation since. Now, the early 1900s saw the establishment of first wave feminism with the concept of women deserving recognition under the law as the thinking and reasonable and intelligent human beings that we are, and I wholeheartedly agree with this version. It was spearheaded by brilliant and brave women such as Susan B. Anthony, who was actually her generation's icon. And she fought tooth and nail for all women, the preborn ones included, to be viewed as the incredible equals which God designed us to be, which is absolutely correct. Now, one of her most famous quotes is, "Men and their rights and nothing more, and women and their rights and nothing less." That's right, that quote came from her. Now, a lesser known quote of hers was published in one of her publications and said that abortion is a horrible crime of child murder. So the OG feminist, the original, the launch point, the one who spearheaded the whole thing, was pro-life, steadfastly to her dying day. Then came second wave feminism in the 1960s, with women such as feminist writer Betty Friedman, and concepts like the wage gap and wanting vastly more access to contraception and other methods of birth control. Now, the second wave was elevated by none other than the Roe versus Wade ruling. The reasoning was basically, men can have sex and not get pregnant, women should be allowed to have sex and not be pregnant. It was all about convenience, with no thought for the humanity or the suffering of the child. Now, at this point, Hillary Clinton coined the saying, "Abortions should be safe and legal and rare." Finally, we get to third wave feminism and the rise of the oft-shouted abortions on demand and without apology, which began to spring up somewhere in the 1990s. With faces such as Anita Hill. Now, this is also where we started hearing phrases such as intersectionality, which was actually coined by lawyer and theorist Kimberly Crenshaw. Now, as Mary Lou Singleton, who was, weirdly enough, a midwife, a nurse practitioner, and a reproductive sovereignty activist, stated, quote, "We need to go back to rallying for abortion on demand and without apology." Couldn't make that up if I tried to, y'all. Once again, that was from Mary Lou Singleton. What's absolutely mind-blowing to me is that from the first leader of the first wave of feminism, which was absolutely a righteous cause in its origins, to the leaders of the third wave, and whatever's coming next, those who call themselves modern-day feminists have completely forgotten, or maybe simply do not care, to include the not-yet-born women into the mix. I can safely say that the one who began it all, Susan B. Anthony, would be deeply ashamed if she could see how far we have fallen. So, my fellow pioneers, we come to the current state of a long and hideous and dark path that our nation has taken. If you don't feel just completely gross and like you need to take a sterilization bath after just watching this, then you've not been listening. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a quick recap from my first video to this one, so you can understand how pivotal this is. The child in the womb is a unique human being, scientifically provable, which I do in my first video. That child is also a person. This person in the womb has a heartbeat, knows the mother's voice, feels pain, and has a future. Abortion erases that future in a silent scream, a painful end that we consider to be too inhumane for death row inmates. Literally, the ways that we abort children, we wouldn't do them to death row inmates because they're considered inhumane to the death row inmates. And yet we're willing to subject our most helpless children to those same exact things. That was never what protecting women or the feminist movement was supposed to do. But now you know. This is the true and accurate history of abortion. And to end this bit of the video, we got a quote from the pro-life side. "Any country that accepts abortion is not teaching its people to love, but to use any violence to get what it wants." That, my friends, is a Mother Teresa original. And speaking of Mother Teresa, to shift gears, this week's book recommendation is called A Call to Mercy, Hearts to Love, Hands to Serve. And it's a canonization of some of her most incredible stories and guidance. She co-wrote it with another awesome author. You can find it most easily on barnesandnobles.com and Goodreads. There are both paperback and large print options depending on what your favorite is. And now, hear me on this. If you are facing a crisis or an unexpected or maybe even an unwanted pregnancy and you're looking for help, or maybe you simply know someone who's facing one of those situations, and even for those who just want to find a way to help women in crisis, please reach out to me. There is no judgment. I just want to help you. And I can help you. I've got the resources to do it. You can leave a comment below. You can find me on Facebook. It's Bex David, and you should see that somewhere on the screen. Or you can find me on any of the main social media platforms. That's Proudly Pro-Life Gen Z Woman on those. That information should also be displaying. I am here to help you. And as per always, everything which I referenced earlier on in this video also has correlating links in the description box should you so desire to do more research on your own. And as for next week, I'm really looking forward to it. We're going to break down men in the movement. And I am so excited because this upcoming video for this next week is going to be the very first video in this series to host guests. For now, though, have a blessed and fantastic rest of your day and or night. Please remember above all else that you are loved and you are cherished and you are precious beyond measure to our Savior, and live in that knowledge. Until next time, let's continue to be pioneers in the space between the picket lines together.